The woman at the door looked at me the way people look at someone who's arrived at the wrong address. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me, and smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes. Dorothy. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, tilted her head. We didn't think you were coming. I had driven an hour and 40 minutes from Kingston in October rain, past the gray stretch of the 401, past the Tim Hortons I'd stopped at for coffee, and the courage to keep going. I was wearing my good wool coat, the burgundy one I'd bought after my husband Robert passed, the one my friend Carol said made me look like a woman who still had places to be. I was holding a hostess gift, a bottle of Ontario Pinot Noir, and a card I'd spent 20 minutes picking out. Trevor said the party started at 6, I said. She leaned against the doorframe, not quite blocking the entrance, not quite stepping aside. Behind her, music spilled out from the open-plan living room I had personally funded the renovation of. I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses. I could smell the appetizer's charcuterie, I imagined, the kind Melissa loved, and Trevor had never once requested before he met her. It did, she said, but it's just, we kept it really intimate. Our friends, you know, our crowd. She lowered her voice then, as if sharing something generous. I honestly wasn't sure you'd want to make the drive, the weather and everything. I looked at her. She was wearing a cream blouse I recognized from the shopping trip she'd taken me on in March, the one where she'd pointed at it and said she couldn't justify the price on her and Trevor's budget. I had bought it for her without being asked. Is Trevor here? I said. He's just busy hosting. She smiled again. I'll tell him you stopped by. Stopped by. As though I'd wandered over from next door. As though I hadn't withdrawn $62,000 from my RRSP 18 months ago to cover the down payment on the very house I was standing outside of. As though the kitchen she was serving appetizers in hadn't been gutted and rebuilt with another $19,000 I'd transferred in 2 installments because she'd said the original layout made her feel claustrophobic. I nodded once, the way you nod when something shifts inside you and you don't yet have words for the shape of it. I understand, I said. Then I walked back to my car. I sat in the driveway for longer than I should have, long enough to watch 3 couples arrive at the front door, laughing, shaking off the rain, being welcomed inside with open arms and warm light. Long enough to see Trevor appear briefly in the window holding a drink, not looking out. Long enough for the hurt to move through me and settle somewhere lower than my chest, something quieter and colder, the kind of feeling that doesn't want to cry, just wants to know how this happened. The answer, I already knew, had been building for years. I'd just been very good at looking away. I pulled onto the street and drove home through the rain. The highway was dark and wet, the headlights of other cars blurring past. I thought about Robert, who had died 4 years ago and left me alone in a house that had too many rooms and a pension that was just enough if I was careful. I thought about Trevor at 7 years old, standing at the end of the driveway waiting for the school bus, turning back once to wave at me in the window. I thought about how I used to believe that raising a child well meant you'd always have a place in their life. I had been wrong about a lot of things. When I got home, I didn't change out of my coat right away. I sat at the kitchen table with the wine still in my bag and the card still sealed, and I opened the drawer where I kept important papers. Bank statements, transfer receipts, the email chain from 18 months ago where Trevor had said, "Mom, I know it's a lot, but it would mean everything. We'd pay you back when we could." The one where I'd written back, "You don't have to pay me back." That's not what family does. I found the document from my financial advisor, Carol Hennessy at RBC, who had gently flagged the RRSP withdrawal and asked twice if I was sure. I had been sure. I had believed that money was the bridge between where we were distant, polite, strangers in some ways, and where I wanted us to be. What I hadn't understood was that Melissa had no intention of crossing that bridge. She had simply used it as flooring. I picked up the phone and called Carol. She answered on the 3rd ring, surprised to hear from me after hours. I apologized for the time. She said not to worry. I told her what had happened, plainly, without editorializing. And then I said, I want to know my options. There was a pause. Then Carol said, quietly, let me look at what we have. We were on the phone for 40 minutes. The joint account Trevor and I had set up 3 years earlier originally meant to be a cottage fund. One of those ideas that never quite materialized, still had my name on it. I had been the primary contributor. $23,000 was sitting in it, untouched, gathering modest interest while the cottage remained a conversation we kept meaning to have. I could remove my contribution. I could close my portion. It would require some paperwork, but it was mine. What about the transfers? I asked. The down payment, the renovation. Carol was honest with me. In Canada, gift transfers between family members carry no legal obligation for repayment unless there's a signed agreement. There wasn't. I had been generous without conditions, which meant legally, the money was gone. I thanked her and said I'd call in the morning. After I hung up, I sat for a while longer. Not angry, not yet. Something more precise than that. I thought about the word intimate. I thought about the way Melissa had leaned on the doorframe of the kitchen I had paid for and looked at me like a polite inconvenience. Then I stood up, put the kettle on, and began to plan. By morning, I had slept 4 hours and made a list. Not a dramatic list. Just the honest accounting of what I had given and what I had received, and where the gap between those two things had become impossible to ignore. $62,000 from my RRSP, $19,000 in 2 transfers, the cream blouse, the cashmere blanket for their spare room, the grocery runs when Melissa was on bed rest with her first pregnancy and Trevor was traveling for work, the 2 weeks I spent at their previous apartment helping them pack and clean and sort. None of it had been given expecting repayment. That wasn't the point. The point was that I had shaped my life around being useful to them, and they had come to see that as the natural order of things, that I would give and recede, that my presence was conditional on my function. What they'd done the night before was simply make it explicit. I called my financial advisor at 9 and asked her to begin the process of separating my portion of the joint account. Then I called my sister Margaret in Vancouver, who listened without interrupting, which is the thing I have always loved most about her. You're not going to say anything to him? She asked. Not yet, I said. I want him to notice the silence first. She understood. Some things can only be learned that way. By noon, my granddaughter Emma called. Emma was Trevor's daughter from his first marriage, 17 years old, sharp in the way only teenagers who've been forced to pay attention to adults are sharp. She'd been at the party briefly before going to her mother's for the night, and something about the expression on my face in the driveway she'd seen me from the upstairs window had stayed with her. Grandma Dot, she said. What happened last night? I told her, gently. The silence on her end was the kind that means something is rearranging itself. She told you it was intimate? Emma said. Her voice was careful. There were like 30 people there. I said nothing. I didn't know you were coming, she continued. Dad didn't say anything. I would have been at the door. I know you would have, sweetheart, I said. That's not something you need to fix. But she just... Emma stopped, started again. Did you know she told Dad you probably wouldn't come because the drive was too hard on you now? Because of your knees? My knees were fine. I walked 3 kilometers every morning along the waterfront. I had hiked the Rideau Trail in September. No, I said. I didn't know that. Another silence. Then Emma said something that surprised me. Grandma, she's been doing this for a while, telling Dad things about you that aren't true, that you complain too much, that you make him feel guilty. I've heard her. I breathed in slowly. Emma, I said, that's not your weight to carry. It is when I've been watching it happen, she said, and she sounded very much like an old soul suddenly. I kept thinking Dad would figure it out. I wanted to say something reassuring. I wanted to give her the version of Trevor that still lived somewhere in the back of my chest, the boy who called his first pet fish Robert Jr. after his father, who once spent an entire March break helping me repaint the sunroom because I'd mentioned offhandedly that the yellow had started to bother me. I wanted to give her that version of her father as something to hold on to, but I had learned, finally, that protecting people from truth is not the same as protecting them. He might still, I said, but for now, let's talk about you. The next few days were quieter than I expected. No call from Trevor, no text from Melissa. I had half anticipated some scrambled explanation, a voicemail, an email, some construction of words designed to make what happened sound like a misunderstanding. Instead, nothing. The silence was its own answer. They hadn't noticed I was missing because they had never truly expected me to be there. I kept my routine. Coffee in the morning, walk along the waterfront, the lake gray and wide and indifferent, groceries, the Tuesday book club I joined after Robert died, where 5 women between the ages of 61 and 78 sat in Linda's living room and talked about books for 40 minutes and about everything else for 2 hours. I told them what had happened. Linda said, "Oh, Dorothy." Annette said something unprintable. Ruth, who was 80 and had seen everything, poured more tea and said, "What are you going to do?" I told her I already had. On Friday, a notification came through from RBC confirming the account separation. The $23,000 had been transferred into my personal account in full. I stared at the number on my phone screen for a moment, then set the phone down and went to put a load of laundry in. Saturday morning, Trevor called. I let it ring. Then I listened to the voicemail. His voice was tight in that way it gets, when he's trying to sound casual and isn't. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a bit. Hope the drive home was okay. Call me back when you get a chance. Take care. Nothing about the party. Nothing about the door. Nothing about the hour and 40 minutes in the rain." I did not call back. Sunday, he called again. This time I answered. "Mom," he said, "is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said. "I'm just living my life." A pause. "You didn't call back." "No," I said. "I didn't." Another pause. He was waiting for me to fill the silence. I had spent 40 years filling Trevor's silences, explaining things away, softening edges, making it easier for him not to have to ask the hard questions. I had been extraordinarily good at it. I said nothing. "Melissa said you stopped by on Saturday," he finally said. "She said you couldn't stay." I held the phone and looked out the window at the maple in the backyard, already deep red, the last of the season. Robert had planted that tree the year Trevor was born. "That's not what happened," I said. "What do you mean?" "I drove 140 kilometers to be at your party, Trevor. I stood at the front door, and your wife told me it was intimate. That I wasn't expected." Silence. Longer this time. "That's not he started. She wouldn't have meant it that way." "How would you know?" I said. "You were inside." I heard him exhale. "Mom, you know how Melissa gets when she's stressed about hosting." And there it was, the familiar architecture. An explanation in place of an apology. The reframing that had been happening slowly, steadily, for years. So gradual I hadn't seen it for what it was. "I know that I paid for the house you were hosting in," I said. "I know I paid for the kitchen she was serving food from. I know I have been patient and generous for a very long time, and I stood at that door in the rain, and she told me it was a family-only event." His voice changed. "You paid for the house because you wanted to." "I did," I said. "But wanting to give something doesn't mean I'm willing to be treated like I don't exist." The silence this time had a different texture. "I need you to understand something," I said, and my voice was steady in a way that surprised even me. "I love you. I have loved you every day of your life, including the days you made it very hard to. But I am not a fund. I'm not a service. I'm your mother. And yesterday, I stood at the door of a house I made possible, and your wife looked at me like I was a stranger she was being polite to, and you were inside, holding a drink, and you didn't come." He didn't answer. "That's all I have to say right now," I said. "When you're ready to talk honestly, I'm here." I ended the call, sat with the quiet. I did not feel powerful. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt the way you feel after a very long season finally breaks raw, but cleaner. Like the first cold morning when the air finally smells like something real. Emma called that evening. She'd heard from her dad. He'd asked her if she knew anything about what I was feeling. She told him yes, she did, and that he should listen instead of explaining. "How did he take that?" I asked. "He went quiet for a long time," she said. Then he said, "She's right, isn't she?" Not a question, just that. I held that for a moment. "Good," I said. "That's something." The weeks that followed were mine, in a way I hadn't allowed myself in years. I repainted the hallway, the color Robert and I had argued about, and never resolved a deep sage green that I had always wanted. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center on Thursday evenings, which put me in a room with 6 other people who were all beginners and entirely willing to be bad at something together. I started cooking properly again. The way I used to before cooking for one felt like evidence of something sad. I made soups. I roasted a chicken. I baked the butter tarts my mother used to make every Thanksgiving and brought a tray to the book club, where Annette declared them evidence of a life well lived. I did not hear from Melissa. I heard from Trevor twice, both times short calls, his voice carrying that particular quality of a man who knows he owes something but hasn't yet worked out how to pay it. I was polite. I was present. I did not make it easy or hard. I simply was. Emma came for a visit mid-November, took the train up from Oshawa, arrived with a backpack and a dozen Timbits, and spent the weekend sleeping in her old room. She helped me go through some of Robert's things I'd been putting off. We found a box of his old slides from family trips Trevor as a boy, laughing on the dock at a rented cottage in Muskoka, gap-toothed, sunburned, happy. Emma held one up to the window and squinted at the light through it. "He was really little," she said. "He was," I said. "He was wonderful then." She looked at me. "He can still be, right?" I put another slide back in its box. "He can try," I said. "Whether he does, that's not mine to carry anymore." She nodded slowly. Then she said she wanted to tell me something. She'd been offered a spot in a competitive arts program at a Toronto school for next September. It was expensive. Her mother couldn't fully swing it. She'd been working part-time and had saved what she could. I looked at her. This girl who had sat with me at Robert's funeral and held my hand and not said a word, which was exactly right. This girl who had shown up at my door in October with Tim Hortons and the simple, uncomplicated fact of her presence. "Emma," I said, "I want to help with that." Her eyes went wide. "Grandma, no. I'm not telling you because—" "I know you're not," I said. "That's exactly why." We talked through the details practically, the way 2 adults talk about money when they respect each other. I told her I wanted to set up an RESP contribution for the remaining balance of her program, not a loan, not a conditional gift, just something given because she had earned it, and I was able, and because some money should go exactly where it's wanted. She said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "Just go and be extraordinary." She cried a little. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table, and outside the November dark came in early the way it does in Ontario, pressing blue against the windows, and it felt like the right kind of evening, full and unhurried and mine. Trevor came in early December. He didn't call ahead. He appeared at the door on a Thursday afternoon, hair damp from the cold, a container of soup in his hand. Chicken and wild rice. My recipe. I stepped aside and let him in without saying anything. He'd made the soup from the card I'd given him years ago, I knew, because the handwriting was mine on the index card. He still had tape to the inside of the cabinet I'd seen on my last visit. He put the soup in the fridge, stood in the kitchen, looking at the walls, the new sage green, the watercolor painting from my Thursday class that I'd put up crooked and left crooked because it was mine to leave any way I liked. "You repainted," he said. "I did," I said. I always wanted that color. He turned to look at me. He had Robert's eyes, gray-green, the kind that go darker when something is troubling them. I should have come to the door, he said. I waited. I knew you were coming. His voice was low. Melissa hadn't told me she was going to say what she said, but I knew before you arrived that she was, that she'd been making it hard. For a long time. Little things. Things I let go of because it was easier. Yes, I said. I told myself you were fine, that you were strong, that you didn't need the invitation to know you were wanted. He stopped. But that's not the same thing, is it? No, I said. It isn't. He sat down at the table. I put the kettle on. She thinks I let you run our finances, he said. She's told me a lot of things about you that I should have questioned, that you were controlling, that the money made you feel entitled to our decisions. He rubbed the back of his neck. I started to believe some of it, not because it was true, but because it was easier than fighting about it. I poured the water, set a mug in front of him. Trevor, I said, I withdrew from my retirement savings to help you buy that house. That wasn't control. That was love. The only thing I wanted in return was to be seen as your mother. He looked down at the table. Melissa and we're having some difficult conversations right now, he said. I'm not going to make this about her. It's about what I let happen, what I didn't say. I sat down across from him. The kitchen was warm, the old refrigerator humming the way it always had. Outside, the first real snow of December was beginning. What do you want to happen now? I asked. He looked up. His face was tired. I want you to know that I see it, that I'm sorry, that I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. He paused. Emma told me what you're doing for her program. She didn't tell me to make me feel guilty. She told me because she said you'd want me to know. Another pause. That's who you are, Mom. And I spent 2 years letting someone convince me it was something else. The snow was picking up now. Soft and thick, the kind that turns every streetlight into a halo. I watched it for a moment. I'm not angry at you anymore, I said. But I can't go back to the way things were, where I give and make myself small and pretend I don't need to be included. I know. That version of me is retired, I said, and he almost smiled at that. We sat with the tea until it was dark outside, the snow accumulating on the maple tree Robert had planted, on the fence I'd repainted in the fall, on the front walk. I would shovel myself in the morning. We didn't resolve everything. Some things don't get resolved in a single kitchen conversation. But there was something present between us that hadn't been there for a long time, honesty, plain and a little uncomfortable. The kind that is the only real beginning. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. The green is nice, he said, looking at the hallway. Robert would have hated it, I said. Trevor smiled, a real one this time, the gap-toothed echo of the little boy on the dock in Muskoka. He really would have, he said. I watched his car move slowly down the street through the snow, the taillights blurring red in the dark. Then I closed the door and stood in the hallway, in my sage-green hallway that I had chosen for no reason except that I wanted it, and I felt the house settle around me, the way houses do when the people inside them have finally told the truth. The months that followed were unremarkable in the best way. Winter deepened, and then, slowly, let go. I went to my watercolor class. I finished 2 paintings good enough to keep, and gave one to Emma for her new room in Toronto. I shoveled my own walk and fixed the kitchen tap myself after watching a video online 3 times, which gave me an inordinate amount of satisfaction. Melissa sent a message in January. Just a few lines, typed carefully, the way someone writes when they know there is no acceptable excuse but feel compelled to attempt an explanation anyway. She wrote that she had been unfair, that she had framed the way she talked about me to Trevor in ways that weren't accurate, that she understood if I needed distance. She did not ask for forgiveness. I appreciated that. Asking for forgiveness before it's been earned is just another way of making the hurt person do more work. I wrote back 3 sentences. I acknowledged what she'd said. I told her that what mattered most to me now was that my son understood the truth. I said that the future was not yet written. That seemed like enough. Spring came late, as it does in Kingston, arriving suddenly in the third week of April, with the kind of light that makes you forget the winter entirely. I planted the front garden tulips, which I had never done before, always meaning to. I started walking along the waterfront again. I had lunch with Margaret when she visited from Vancouver, and we sat on the patio of a restaurant downtown with a glass of white wine each and talked for 3 hours about nothing and everything. The easy, unaccountable talk of sisters who have long since learned each other entirely. Emma graduated from her first year with marks that made me put the grade sheet on the fridge. She came home for a weekend in June and we hiked part of the Rideau Trail, her 20 strides ahead of me, then looping back, impatient and affectionate. She said she'd started a project photographing women over 60 in their own spaces, their kitchens, their gardens, their workshops, something about the way a life accumulates in the places people inhabit. She asked if she could photograph me in mine. I said yes. She took it in the kitchen. Morning light, my hands around a coffee cup, the sage green wall behind me, the crooked watercolor painting just visible in the corner of the frame. She showed it to me on her camera screen. I looked at the woman in the photograph, older than I always imagined myself to be, in the quiet, persistent way that age surprises you, but steady, present, entirely and unapologetically there. I've never been photographed like that, I told her. Like someone who knows where she is. Emma looked at the image. That's because you do now, she said. She wasn't wrong. There are things I lost that I will not get back. Money, yes. But more than that, years of performing smallness, of making myself manageable, of believing that the way to hold on to the people I loved was to never ask them to look directly at me. I lost the version of myself that thought love had to be purchased and maintained through perpetual usefulness. I did not mourn that version for long. What I have now is quieter and more solid. A hallway the color I always wanted, a garden with tulips coming up crooked and bright, a granddaughter who photographs me like I'm worth seeing, a son who is slowly, imperfectly, learning to say what he means, a life that belongs to me in all the small accumulating ways that are the only ways that matter. Some nights I sit on the back porch after dinner, tea in hand, the lake visible through the trees if the light is right. I think about Robert, who would have had something dry and loving to say about all of it. I think about the woman who drove through the October rain and stood at a door and was turned away and chose, finally, not to fold herself around that dismissal and call it acceptance. I think, this is what it means to be seen. Not loudly, not in a moment of public vindication, but here, in the ordinary, continuous presence of a life lived without apology. If any part of this is yours, if you've stood at a door like that, if you've funded a room you weren't allowed to enter, I only want to say this: what you feel is real. And you don't have to keep driving away in the dark. You can turn around. You can begin.